This is Omega and you're watching Money Mondays. In today's video, what I want to speak to you about is news related to indices. This video is sponsored by the all-in-one Vantage trading app. Trade indices like a pro with low spreads and leverage as high as 1,000 to 1. Diversify your trading portfolio with over 1,000 plus tradable instruments, including 25 plus of popular market indices like the Dow Jones 30, Nasdaq 100, and DAX 50. Trade indices like a pro on the Vantage app. Trade smarter at Vantage. So one of the most powerful tools that you have at your disposal as a trader is the ability to look at the news in an attempt to predict what is going to happen with particular indices. So what sort of news should you be looking at? Not every news meets the same criteria, or rather the same level of importance in regards to how they affect indices. Some news just have no effect whatsoever, and then other news are very, very impactful. So the sort of news that you can look for in regards to indices is things that are occurring in regards to companies. So these could be something like earnings reports, where companies basically announce how well they've done or how not well they've done. So the earnings calendar is probably one of the most important resources for looking at news like this. It could also be regulatory developments. So regulatory developments could be news such as changing in laws and rules in regards to a particular industry or sector in the economy. It could also be economic data announcements. So various government institutions and various research houses and various financial institutions as well publish research. And some of the research that is published is considered to be part of the economic calendar, or what we call the news cycle in regards to the world of the financial markets. So something like consumer price index, or maybe interest rates announcements, or anything that has to do with inflation data, or anything that has to do with population data, or any other metric that can easily be measured and looked at and understood in terms of how it can affect the economy. So news like that can drive markets, can drive behavior and sentiment of other investors. And so that's something that is quite important. The first most common way that people tend to use the news in regards to trading indices is to look at correlation of news events to particular indices. So for example, there could be a negative story, a story that will drive down values in the market. So for example, there could be an announcement by the Fed, so basically the Federal Reserve, which is in control of interest rates in the United States. They announced that rates are not going to decrease, and what that could lead to is a decrease in values of certain indices that are sensitive to interest rates. So for example, the property index might in fact actually fall. Why? Because property is a sector and industry that is very much correlated to interest rates. So that would be a negative story for them if interest rates were to stay the same or were to go up. Well, now that same news can actually be positive for certain industries and sectors. So for example, the banking world can be positively affected by rising interest rates. At the same time, it can be negatively affected by rising interest rates depending on how the bank is positioned financially within itself. So for example, we saw it last year, some major events early in the year within banking where we had a few banks such as Silicon Valley Bank actually collapse due to rising interest rates, and that's because of how the bank had positioned itself financially. Whilst other banks, on the other hand, actually grew in value because when rates are increasing, banks are earning more capital, meaning the banking index actually performed very well throughout last year up until this year. So that's something for you to look at. Some news can be negative and some news can be positive, even if it's just the same story. Now, there can be news that is positive that basically affects sentiment positively. Basically, this is the type of news that makes investors want to go buy more of a particular asset, and that is something that is quite important. So be aware that within the news cycle, you'll find positive stories. So for example, a positive announcement in regards to earnings. So a company announces that they've made good earnings, that can cause the company's value to rise. And thus, if a company is part of a particular index, that index itself can actually rise. So for example, when most of the large technology stocks announce their earnings reports, the Nasdaq 100 will move in a particular direction. So if there's a lot of positive earnings from the top stocks that are within the Nasdaq 100, you'll tend to find that the Nasdaq 100 moves up. And so correlation between news events and indices is actually quite important, and it falls as part of the analyzing process when you are looking at a particular index or a group of indices. You want to look at whatever positive stories are coming out, whether it could be a geographic related narrative. So for example, you could look at news from Germany to try and understand what is going to be happening with the DAX 50, or potentially it could be industry related news, so data that's coming out about a particular sector or industry in regards to its financial performance or change in products or change in regulations. So it's very important for you to analyze news and then correlate it back to a particular index to understand how that index might in fact actually perform. So the second thing you have to look at is in fact, how do you access the news? So on the Vantage Trading app, you can actually access the news 24/7 by clicking on the Discover button. If you do that, you can discover a lot of stories that you can then correlate back to particular indices, and some of the stories will be marked, in fact, and you'll be able to see which indices or which assets are those stories correlated to. This is a very powerful tool for you to actually track narratives and track stories and track sentiment, because remember, prices go up and down based on how other investors and other traders are actually behaving in the market. And so by understanding the stories that are driving those traders and those investors in terms of their buying and selling decisions, you can best be able to predict what might happen to a particular index or to a particular set of indices. So go ahead, log into the Vantage Trading app, and then click on the Discover and see a long list of stories that you can start to track and correlate back to indices. One of my favorite tools that's on the Vantage Trading app is the fact that when I click on a particular asset, so in this case an index, so just like you can see here, the Nasdaq 100, when I click on it, I can actually see a long list of stories, basically news that relates to this particular index. And this can help me actually track what are the narratives and what are the perspectives of market participants in regards to the index. Thus, I can actually filter out my own decisions according to the narratives that I'm looking at right here. So the reason I love this tool quite a lot is because it's such a lovely way to actually get a lot of data about the index without having to comb through a lot of Google pages to find good information. One of the really cool parts about the Vantage Trading app is that it actually offers real-time updates. So real-time just basically means as the stories flow into the news cycle of the day or of the week or of the month, you can actually find those stories within the Discover tool on the Vantage Trading app. It's a very powerful tool for you to stay on top of things and to always know what's going on in the market. And so that's one of the favorite tools that I actually really enjoy on the Vantage Trading app. And to top it off, this is all delivered in a user-friendly interface. And so one of the things that I really like is to use a system that is user-friendly, meaning I'm not confused about where things are. I know exactly how to navigate it and where to go to find information. And that's why I love the Vantage Trading app. So as you can see on my screen, you can literally see the user-friendliness of the app and how simple it is to actually navigate and find what you're looking for on the app. And that is something that's very, very important when you're trying to stay on top of things. You want to quickly be able to move, get the story, read it, understand what's going on, and filter it and use it as part of your trading process. So this is something that's actually quite important. So just to summarize it for you guys, very, very important to remember, the news is pivotal in understanding the various narratives and various stories that are going on in the economy. On top of that, you want to always be staying on top of the news. Why? Because by knowing what's going on in the economy, you can understand where other traders and other investors are coming from and what type of decisions they might in fact actually make. Then when it comes to what type of news should you be looking at, not all news is the same. So some news is more important and some news is less important. But the key thing is to know that there are news that affects companies, so such as earnings reports. There's news that could maybe come from regulators, so regulatory developments, rule changes, and laws in a particular industry or sector. That's something that's important to actually look at. And then there could be geopolitical data, so events that are happening around the world that are either geopolitical in nature or just localized in nature. So that's something that's very important for you to look at. Of course, on top of this, there are a plethora of other types of news events that you can actually look at. And the cool thing that you can actually do using the Vantage Trading app is to track different stories and then develop for yourself a narrative that will help you perceive and predict where a particular index might in fact actually go. Until then, guys, enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.
No one is born a trader. Be reborn a trader. Trade smarter at Vantage.